any child controlling his or her seizures using exogenous ketones without also doing the ketogenic diet. I just find it hard to believe that at least some of those people haven't tried it out to see. I do know some patients with bipolar disorder and even schizophrenia who are doing extraordinarily well on a ketogenic diet. They have tried to switch off the ketogenic diet using exogenous ketones. Their symptoms came back, and so they found that it just wasn't effective. Now, again, those are anecdotes. My scientific speculation about why is because the ketogenic diet is actually not necessarily about ketones themselves. Ketones are one of a multifaceted story there. And so when people do a ketogenic diet, they're also they're lowering glucose levels, they're improving insulin signaling, they're ramping up mitochondrial biogenesis, in particular in the liver, because mitochondria actually make ketones. That's where they're made, and they're primarily made in the liver mitochondria. So when somebody's in a fasting state or on a ketogenic diet, their liver mitochondria go through the roof because they're being called to action. It's like, hey, body's in starvation mode, get to work. And so the mitochondria, the cell senses, we need more mitochondria to process fat, to turn it into ketones so that those ketones can get up to the brain and keep the brain fueled. Because fatty acids can't fuel the brain. Only ketones can. Now, so my sense is that, and the gut microbiome changes and everything, the changes in hormones. So if you're eating a lot of donuts and drinking a bottle of ketones, the donuts are going to prevent your body from lowering glucose levels. You're still going to have the high glucose levels from the donuts. You're still going to probably have the impaired insulin signaling. You're probably still going to possibly have some inflammation from the inflammatory effects of that food. And so just drinking ketones alone won't be enough. I think for people who are metabolically healthy, I'll include you in that, I think ketones can play a really beneficial role, no doubt. I think exogenous ketones may in fact prove invaluable in clinical use for patients who maybe can't follow a super strict ketogenic diet, but maybe could do a low carb diet. And then given the research that's happening with alcohol use disorder, I could imagine a situation, here's the $1 million, tip to whoever wants to go out and get this if it actually turns out to be true. I could imagine a scenario where we use exogenous ketones with alcoholics, and that every time they have a severe craving for alcohol, they drink ketones instead.
Which sort of tastes like alcohol. The ketone esters, when I take them, I drink them straight. Sometimes I'll put them in seltzer. And I'm not a big drinker, as I mentioned. I might have an alcoholic drink every once in a while. I just don't ever crave it. I just do it every, I think 2020 was the last time I had a drink of alcohol. So obviously I'm not a representative example. But the ketones taste good to me, and they obviously don't get you drunk. They do seem to flick on my alertness pretty quickly. My understanding is that they are the brain's preferred fuel source, meaning they are going to be the first fuels used by the brain when there's a buffet of fuels available. If there's glucose in my bloodstream, there's circulating liquid ketones, that ketones would be used first or preferentially. Is that true?
I think it's a complex question. I mean, some research that we have suggests that there are brain areas or brain cells that require glucose and cannot use ketones. So 100% of the brain cannot be fueled with ketones, as far as we can tell. So there are some areas that require glucose, and that's probably the reason we have gluconeogenesis, is to keep the body going and keep the brain going no matter what. But when ketones are available, especially if ketones are high, the way I think about it is not that ketones are like the preferred fuel source and glucose goes to the wayside. But the way I think about it is that you have a range of cells with varying degrees of metabolic health. And some of those cells are going to be extraordinarily healthy with appropriate, healthy, abundant mitochondria. And those cells are probably going to continue to use glucose as a fuel source. But if ketones happen to be there, sure, they'll use that too. Like, why not? But the real money is metabolically compromised tissues, whether it's brain cells or other tissues. But we're talking about the brain. So if you've got metabolically compromised brain cells, because it's not across the board, like with Alzheimer's brain scans, there are specific regions that are more metabolically compromised than others. And that's why we see patterns of atrophy in specific brain regions, is because those regions are dysfunctional metabolically for whatever reason. And we can get into why that might be, but my sense is that if you've got a metabolically compromised cell, that cell is sending out a distress signal. That cell is calling resources from the body, like feed me, give me something. And if it can't use glucose effectively, it is going to suck up those ketones and then start running on all cylinders or closer to it. And that process is so critical, because what it means is that if that cell was barely getting by on 60% of its real ATP requirement, it means that it doesn't have enough energy for maintenance and repair functions. As soon as you give that cell 100% energy or close to it, even if you get it up to 90% of its preferred energy amount, it can start to repair itself. I mean, that's the beauty of the human body and living organisms, is that they have a priority list of what they're going to do. And if that cell senses that there are defective molecules, defective proteins in this cell that need to be replaced, once it gets enough fuel, it will start repairing itself and doing that work.
That makes sense. Thank you for that clarification.